Right, let's go to another issue because South Australia is planning to make electric car owners pay to use the roads, and so they should. They're considering introducing an electric vehicle tax, and it's a fairness measure because everybody that drives petrol or diesel vehicles, well, they pay for road upkeep via the excise or the tax on fuel, and as it stands, those driving electric cars don't pay anything like the same contribution. South Australian Treasurer Rob Lucas has said that someone has to pay for the road maintenance and the upgrades, and it should be people using the roads. Well, there's no one better than the member for Hughes, Liberal MP Craig Kelly, former chair of the government's policy committee when it comes to this topic, to discuss it all. He joins me now from Sydney. This is a fairness measure. You know, absolutely right in South Australia. Why should everybody driving a petrol car or a diesel car pay for the roads and all the infrastructure that our good old Tesla drivers enjoy for free?
Well, Peter, normally if you say, I want to put a new tax or bring a new tax in, it's wash your mouth out with soap and don't say such terrible words. But in this case, Peter, you're 100% right. At the moment, every time I go to fill up at the Bowser, I'm paying 42.6 cents per litre in fuel excise. And then I pay the GST on top of that. So that's 46.5 cents every litre of petrol when I fill up. And that goes paid to the roads. And yes, there's an argument that more of it a greater percentage should go to pay for the roads. But primarily, that amount that I pay helps maintain and upgrade our roads. But if I own an electric car, Peter, I avoid that tax altogether. So the current situation we have is that someone that drives a ute that lives out in Western Sydney or the southern parts of Sydney down in my electorate, they are actually subsidising someone that's buying $100,000 for a Tesla and they are driving it around the inner city suburbs of Sydney. It's just simply creating a level playing field so everyone that uses the roads makes a contribution.
You make a very good point because it's likely to hit hard, this inequity, unless it's fixed. It hits hard the regional areas, it hits hard the people in the outer suburbs where there isn't, the distance is required to drive and there isn't charging stations, and there won't be in a country like Australia in regional areas for a long time. We probably won't see it in our lifetime. But this is a fairness measure, isn't it, between urban dwellers and country and outer suburban Australians?
Well, Peter, the urban dwellers actually get a little bit of a benefit already. The more remote area of Australia that you live in, generally the more kilometres that you pay, the more fuel that you use, and therefore the more excise that you pay. Like, I know my vehicle takes about 70 litres, so I'm paying around $30 plus in tax every time I fill up. Now, someone that lives, the further you live out of Sydney, the more kilometres you do, the more fuel you use, the more you contribute to the road excise tax. But yet, someone that decides that they'll go along with an electric car simply avoids all these taxes. Now, the electric car users will argue, well, I'm doing my bit for the environment, but look, that's just a complete and utter nonsense. The reality is, on the eastern seaboard of Australia, when you plug your electric car into the grid to charge in, you're actually getting equal. Or when you actually add in all the embedded emissions, you're actually having more CO2 emissions than an equivalent petrol or diesel car.
Yeah, and of course, when people talk about electric cars and they measure the electric car emissions vis-a-vis petrol and diesel emissions, they usually use European reports. And of course, when you plug into the grid in Europe, 9 times out of 10, you're taking a good whack of nuclear power in there, which is baseload and zero emissions, which you're not in Australia. Dominic Perrottet, the Treasurer in New South Wales, he says he's also considering this tax as well.
Well, it'd be very fair. Look, I think it should be introduced Australia-wide. I think it's only fair that those that want to go around grandstanding in electric cars, good luck to them. If you want to show off an electric car, that's fine. But you shouldn't be asking other motorists to subsidise you. You shouldn't be asking other motorists that live in the western part of Sydney and regional parts of Australia to subsidise you, where they pay that excise but you escape it.
And let's not forget, if Bill Shorten had won the election last year, of course, there was a requirement that 50% of us had to go into electric cars by a certain date, wasn't there?
When you mentioned Bill Shorten winning the electric, a shiver went up my spine, Peter, the thought that would have been a possibility.
It was pretty close, mate. It was pretty close.
Oh, dear. Well, it just shows the bullet that this nation dodged. Yes, look, Bill Shorten simply didn't know what he's talking about. And this is, you see, with Joel Fitzgibbons firing at Labor's policy. Labor's policy was a disaster. it would have harmed the Australian nation. It would have harmed people living in regional areas and the outer suburbs in Sydney. Joel Fitzgibbons has finally called this out, and I hope that the Labor Party finally pays some attention to what Joel Fitzgibbons is saying.
And if they don't listen to Joel Fitzgibbon, I have to say, you will only prosper on the coalition side of politics.
Look, the nation will also prosper, Peter. We don't want one party in Australia to have these extremist climate policies that they think they're going to change the weather. Labor's policies are simply not in Australia's national interests. They're done by extremists and climate zealots that harm Australia's national interests. We want to see an opposition that comes up with sensible policies, because the better the opposition is, the better government that you have. So I really hope that the Labor Party actually listen to Joel Fitzgibbons, because he is on the right track, and you've got guys like Mark Butler and Anthony Albanese taking off on these extreme climate policies that are just going to harm the Australian nation.
Spot on. Have a great weekend, Craig Kelly. Thanks for being with us on a Friday night.
Thank you, Peter.